This is Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Ron Rohde, Kentucky Afield's first host back in 1953. Now, I'm proud to present Charlie Baglin.
When you talk to an expert, you'd come away with not just answers to simple questions, but with inside information that makes the facts make sense. This week, we go inside outdoors on ducks and geese. And there's more to these migrating birds than meets the ear. It's waterfowl season in Kentucky. And if you're blind to the background about these birds, or if you're actually spending all winter in a blind, then spend some time with us today on Kentucky Afield Radio.
Boys were in trouble. About 10 seconds later, he said boys were going down.
A true story.
And it sunk right out from under us.
20 degrees.
Within seconds, one boating trip went
straight down.
The water was bone chilling.
Once you hit that water, it's so cold you can't move.
The human body wasn't designed for this.
It took my breath away as soon as I hit it, and my hands were so cold in a matter of seconds that I couldn't pop the clip on my waders to get them off.
Conditions were so bad it's amazing that anybody survived.
Perfect for duck hunting, but not for a swim in the middle of a river.
Going overboard is never the thought.
You have to think ahead.
Fun can turn frantic in seconds.
There's no time to react when your world just sinks out from under you.
3 hunters, 2 survivors, 1 reason.
Your life jacket's got your back.
Make sure your first mate isn't your last.
I really don't think that I could have made it without a life jacket.
Your Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife reminds you, your life jacket's got your back, and the backing of sportsmen on winter water everywhere. Welcome to Kentucky Afield Radio. Today we go inside outdoors with ducks and geese and other migratory game birds. There's a science behind those honks and quacks that you may not have known. Along the way, you may gather some nifty trivia to impress your friends and make you a wiser waterfowl hunter. Dr. John Brunjes is my friend, and he is also the top biologist in charge of migratory game birds for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. And for as experienced as he is, any self-respecting duck will spot him as a phony from a mile away if he's blowing a duck call.
When I blow the duck call, it sounds wrong to me. I have to have somebody that's a good caller listen to me call, tell me when I'm doing it right, so that I can learn what sounds wrong to me to blow it that way. But I don't use call very much. It's usually counterproductive.
I had a fellow on the show once, and he was saying it helps to have 4 or 5 sportsmen calling at once to sort of cover up each other's mistakes.
If you go out and you hear birds and the flock will start coming in and all the geese on the lake will start talking back to them. And then they may shut up and one single bird may talk to them, or they may be quiet all the way coming in. Having more is generally better because birds are noisy, and especially geese and things like that. The more sound you create coming from different places, I think the better off you are.
Well, let's just say we had a bunch of people from France and Germany and China, and they all just started talking. You might as well assume that it's English because you can't make out a word here or there anyway, but you do know it's people.
Right. And the thing is, if you listen to wild birds, they don't call right. If you listen to a professional calling contest or something, wild birds mess up all the time. You don't have to be perfect. The biggest thing that you can do that most people mess up on calling is just calling too much. I mean, the birds, especially by the time they got to Kentucky, they've been shot in Canada. They've been shot in the Dakotas. They've been shot in Missouri and Illinois. They know what a duck call is. And mostly your best option is use it very sparingly.
And that would be, I guess, good advice for the people in the Dakotas and Illinois and everywhere else coming down the pike.
It is, and again, it's for the most part, you just see, like, I spent time in Texas where there was very little pressure in the Texas Panhandle, and even still, you could see, I had a guy that hunted with us, which was a state champion caller in his youth, and he's amazing, and he would call too much, though, sometimes, and even birds that weren't pressured, you could see them, they were coming, and they would be like, okay, that's too much, and they would flare off of us. Birds are coming, shut up, let them come. When the geese set their wings, the guys on the wood are all shut up, and they come in almost total silence. So if birds are coming to you, best thing I've found is to keep my mouth shut. Don't give them a reason to look at you and decide that you aren't right.
Well, John, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here.
You haven't been on in a while.
It has been a little while.
You've gotten the new job, and of course you've been on since you have become the Waterfowl coordinator. What is the real title you have?
The Migratory Bird Program Coordinator.
That's a lot of birds. There's only every bird in the state is migratory except for 3.
Right, and we have I guess a kind of a crazy split that our program does the game migratory birds and wetland, because the program used to be the wetland program, also basically wetland-oriented non-game species. So things like herons and least terns and things like that are also included in our program. But mostly we focus on game migratory birds.
Game migratory, so we know ducks and geese.
Yep.
What else? No, that was sandhill crane.
Well, no, but what do we shoot more of than any other?
Turkey.
Morning doves.
Morning doves.
Morning doves are our number one harvested migratory bird. Is
that in your program?
Yes. Doves are in my program. We shoot about 500,000 doves a year in Kentucky.
Is that enough?
I'm sure there are lots of people that didn't get their limit would say no, it wasn't. But that we harvest about 5.5% of the population in Kentucky each year through hunting. So they could handle more, but the problem is people go on opening day and they don't go a whole lot after that. So it's mostly about what you harvest on opening day.
While we're on the subject then, let's just talk about harvest, because I'm looking at the big picture. And I know times have changed over the last few hundred years. One management tool to keep a population in check so that they don't get out of hand would be to hunt them, or to fish them, or to trap them.
Correct.
Yeah, people come into the mix, whereas in the past we would have mountain lions and wolves. And what was the pressure on mourning doves or on ducks or geese prior to man being out there wanting to bring a few home to the dinner table?
They're probably the same pressures for most of those species today. I mean, mountain lions are gone for deer, but the predators that eat mourning doves, Cooper's hawks and things like that, sharp-shinned hawks, and just about everything eats mourning doves, actually. Those things are still out there and still impact the birds. The last couple of years, we've had a couple of kind of slow years of hunting for doves. Populations are down because reproduction has been poor because we had thunderstorms during the breeding season. Dove nests, if you've ever found a dove nest, there's about 4 twigs loosely hanging on the tip of a branch somewhere that you're amazing somehow that they can balance an egg in there. And a thunderstorm at the right time will destroy a big chunk of our reproductive effort for the year. So it can be the same things that used to impact them probably still impact them today. The thing is about hunting with a lot of migratory birds, we've learned that hunting mortality can replace other types of mortality. But if we remove that hunting mortality, then those other types of mortality will increase.
Really?
Yeah. So like mourning doves. Mourning doves, example. In Texas, they shoot 11 million mourning doves a year. The mortality rate of the population of mourning doves is 70%. So 70% of the population dies every year.
Period. No matter what you do.
Well, with 11 million doves being shot, if you go to Connecticut, they are considered a songbird and they are not hunted. The mortality rate for mourning doves in Connecticut is 70% per year. So basically the birds that are being killed through hunting don't die through hunting, but now in Connecticut they die through house cats eating them, through other birds eating them, through window strikes, through other ways. So basically, you really, even though you shoot all these birds, you haven't changed in the end how many birds there are in the population to begin the next year.
So does that apply to other birds as well? This is about mourning doves.
It does for lots of species. The concept is called compensatory mortality. And the idea is that every year you have a mortality rate that's made up of these different components. And that if you change any one of those components, the others will compensate. If you increase one, the others decrease. And so that most species, we believe, have some degree of compensatory mortality. The problem is if any one of those pushes up too high or too low, the others aren't able, you basically break the rubber band. It's able to compensate some, but you reach a threshold where you can no longer compensate. So if we tripled our mourning dove harvest, that would be probably too much for that rubber band, and then all of a sudden we would cause the population to decline a little bit by increasing the rate. We do that with deer. We want to, with deer, to push deer in a place where we cause the population to decline. There are times where we want to, but most species show some form of compensation. And if you think about it, if you talk about people, if we had a big disease come through and a bunch of people died of disease, well, less people would die from car accidents because there's less people out there. Less people would die of old age because of this. So one form of mortality impacts the other forms.
That's fascinating insight. Dr. John Brunjes, Kentucky's waterfowl specialist. Back with more. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We're back on Kentucky Afield Radio. My name's Charlie Baglin. While the show is about typical ducks and geese and what we will see in Kentucky, it does go far beyond that. It extends from the Gulf of Mexico well into Canada. To know what affects waterfowl here, it helps to understand the whole picture. And while we're talking about Canada geese and mallards, many of the same principles about their population growth or how hunting seasons are regulated, we can apply that to quail or rabbits or deer, the balance of nature in modern America. It's all interconnected. Dr. John Brunjes, the migratory game bird expert here in Kentucky, is in the studio. I'm hearing, for example, deer numbers are on the rise. I read about geese, and I've got some notes here, up 8%, up 5% from last year. Still, the numbers overall seem to be growing. Does this slow down the growth, or what?
It can. Again, depends on where, how far you push that category. Like geese, yes, geese continue to grow for us. Kentucky has had a fairly slow growing population compared to some other places like Michigan or somewhere. And so we've slowly kind of been increasing our harvest because what we want to do is find where that threshold is, where we cause the rubber band to break. And then all of a sudden okay, this is as far as we can push the harvest and without causing the population to decline. Like for wood ducks, we've done a lot of work on wood ducks and hunted wood ducks for years. We know that wood ducks, somewhere around 16% of the population, if we harvest less than 16%, the population will remain stable or increase. If we harvest more than 16%, the population will start to decline. And so through time, we learn as biologists where those thresholds are and try to keep them within those thresholds so that no impact, at least an impact that we understand and the population can handle.
I realize I should ask this question to the program coordinator in charge. Let's say the reverse of that. You have bobwhite quail, and you're trying your best to improve bobwhite quail numbers. Everything you can do for habitat's being done. Here's what the population is, and this compensatory mortality is going to keep it there. Is there anything you can really do to grow animals?
Yes, every population has some factor that limits it. It's called a limiting factor. It depends on the species and what it needs. For bobwhite quail, again, I'm not a quail biologist, so I'm stretching a bit here, but it's habitat. They need a certain amount of habitat. They got to have bare ground in that habitat.
The carrying capacity.
Yes, the carrying capacity of the thing. So if you increase the carrying capacity, then you can have more total quail out there on the landscape. You might not change the mortality rate, but you have a greater carrying capacity on the landscape, so you can have more.
If you want to grow a population, bobwhite quail, for example, why would you hunt them?
Number one, the people who hunt them value this species and put extra effort into them. If you can demonstrate that hunting is not additive to the mortality rate, but basically the idea, we hunt quail, we can still have just as many as if we didn't. And so that's the idea behind the compensatory mortality, is that we're always learning where is that threshold that we can harvest things, and it really doesn't change the overall number of birds that are out there. It's a hard concept to grasp. In Kentucky, we shoot 500,000 or 600,000 mourning doves every year. And if we stop the season tomorrow, there wouldn't be one more mourning dove in the state, because those that died from hunting replaced mortality from other places.
They would have died in some other way.
And so quail, the same sort of thing. Again, I don't know the biology of quail to know each species has, a kind of a set of biology. And you can, again, in a certain area, you can go in and over-harvest a certain area, and you cause that compensatory ability to break. But as a whole population, there's good evidence that you can still harvest birds, and it doesn't change your overall population.
Let's talk more so about geese and ducks and waterfowl. One thing that concerns me, and I've heard you bring it up on this show in the past, is their habitat up north, the tundra. There's a lot of geese, and they go up there and they pretty much obliterate the tundra. But fortunately, there's a lot of it up there. For the tundra to recover, will it ever?
What you're talking about are the issues and concerns we've had with snow geese. It's a population of geese that has expanded with the agriculture that's available for them to eat in the winter in the U.S., and their population has expanded over the years. They're extremely hard to hunt in a lot of cases, and so they're hard to kill, and they survive well, and the population has grown. And they are Arctic nesting. The birds that come to Kentucky nest up in Baffin Island or Queen Maud Gulf, or way up in the Arctic, just about the Arctic regions of Canada, and they come to Kentucky and other parts, Louisiana and places in the wintertime. And there's been a huge amount of concern because they do. Here in Kentucky, if we obliterate a field, you know the process. You've got dirt, and then you've got grass, and then you've got bushes, and you've got trees, and all that in 30, 40 years, it's all back to a forest again. Well, on the tundra, it doesn't recover. Everything is slow growing. You got these little tiny 3-inch bushes that are 50, 80 years old. And so it's a long, slow process to recover. And what we're concerned about as this population grew, that these colonies where they nest up in the Arctic would eat up where they are and just move. And as they grew, not only would they destroy where they were, but they're going to move into new places and continuously destroy.
And they'll move more quickly than the habitat they just left can recover.
Oh, way more quickly. That was the concern. Now, what we've discovered is a lot of our concerns were built on areas like James Bay, where the southern areas where they nested, there's a colony on the Gamaski Island in James Bay that's just obliterated. It's just mud. And it will basically, because of they change the vegetation so much, salt water has intruded, and no matter what, nothing will ever grow there again. And so these southern colonies, we saw this happening, and we assumed it was going to happen in the far northern colonies, because Baffin Island and places, Queen Maud Gulf, it's an adventure to get there. I mean, you've got to have multiple flights, landing in little, nothing places, and trucking gas out, and it's impossible to get out there and work in these places. So we really didn't work in them very much. Well, with all these concerns, we put more and more effort out there, and while we found that they are destroying these spots or impacting these spots heavily, they're not moving. The size of the colony has grown a little bit, but what we feared was that they would eat everything up and move to a new spot. That's not happening. The colonies are expanding, but they're staying kind of in these same spots. And so while they are having an impact on these areas where they nest, it's not as bad as we feared because they're not moving into new areas.
What are they eating while they're there? What's left?
There's still enough, a little bit of vegetation there. It's replacing itself enough that they are surviving and they're staying there. Your question is what we were sure was going to happen. There's nothing left. They got to move. There is still something there. It's regenerating better than we predicted. There's maybe some stuff that we didn't expect to come in that's growing, some new types of vegetation that wouldn't normally be there without this pressure, and they're able to handle the pressure a little bit better. And so the other thing that we've kind of learned is the Arctic is inconceivably vast. Here's this colony that's hundreds of acres that the geese are destroying, or thousands of acres that the geese are destroying. But the Arctic is millions and millions and millions and millions of acres that, yes, these spots are impacted, but it's so vast that it really isn't quite as bad as we thought.
Is there a fear of short-sightedness there? We thought the dodo bird, there were a lot of those to go around. Or we thought that there was what was that bird, black in the sky? The passenger pigeon, yeah.
Again, we're carefully monitoring the population. We've instituted some things to try to reduce the population. We now have this conservation order season, which occurs after the regular goose season closes. It allows you to use electronic calls, and we doubled the harvest by doing that. In that time, since we doubled that harvest, we went from 700,000 to 1.5 million birds. We thought the population was 8 or 9 million, and so that's having an impact. But through getting to the Arctic and putting bans out and things, we've learned the population is a lot bigger than we thought. It's probably closer to 20 or 30 million. So shooting 1.5 million out of 30 million isn't having a whole lot of impact. But as it stands right now, the next step would be a draconian measure that nobody's willing to go to. And as long as we aren't seeing major problems, we'll just keep an eye on them and keep watching.
Can you even say what that might have been?
The draconian measure?
Yes.
It would basically be going to the breeding ground and just shooting them on the breeding ground. The wholesale, large-scale slaughter.
Much like we did to wild pigs in western Kentucky.
Something like that. Again, that would be a major set of decisions. The cost of that would be in the millions and millions of dollars, because getting people to the Arctic and getting that kind of stuff is extreme expensive. We're nowhere near that point. Again, as we learn, the biologists who work in the Flyway, I work in the Mississippi Flyway with biologists from all over the U.S. and Canada, and the Canadian biologists, some of the world's leading authorities on snow geese come to a meeting with us every winter, and hearing them talk, it's not nearly as bad as we had feared kind of originally. So I don't see that we're anywhere close to that place where we would take on one of those draconian measures.
I think it's interesting that you are the waterfowl coordinator for the state of Kentucky, and here we stand talking about Canada.
Absolutely.
We'll tie it all back to home sweet home, plus we'll have our fishing report just ahead after the break. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We are back on Kentucky Afield Radio into our second half hour. My name is Charlie Baglin, and if you would like to hear this show again, or send the link or share the link on Facebook, go to facebook.com and put Kentucky Afield Radio in the search box. You'll find us there. You can like us and find our weekly links. They are also available on youtube.com. Just put Kentucky Afield Radio in the search box, and you'll find a long list. Plus, our iTunes account for podcast, we believe, is back up and running. We've had some difficulty with this thing for like 3 months. We think we've got it all ironed out. Tell us if it works. Tell us if it doesn't. Our show this half hour is on ducks and geese and other migratory game birds in Kentucky. John Brunjes is my guest, and you've heard about having to run something up the flagpole. Get this. Not only does he have to deal with the fish and wildlife hierarchy, he needs approval from every state along the Mississippi River Flyway. He'll explain. First up, our fishing report.
Hi, this is John Williams with the Fishery Report for Southeast Kentucky. At Lake Cumberland, striped bass fishing has been good of late. A lot of those fish are up in the major creek arms. I hear Fishing Creek's been good of late. Just look for gulls busting the shallow on the surface. Usually the stripers are close by. Best bet is drifting live bait if you have it. Elsewhere, some of you may have heard about the large trout that was caught this past week below Wolf Creek Dam. We had a 14.20-pound rainbow trout, which is just a few ounces off the state record, caught below Wolf Creek Dam. So you might want to give those trout a try below the dam there in the Cumberland tailwaters. As always, good luck, good fishing.
Down in western Kentucky, it's a new year on the lake, and that means big things for crappie fishing right now. If you haven't heard, we've had some excellent wintertime fishing for crappie at Kentucky Lake, where people have just been catching their limits within a couple of hours. It's the best that we've had in several years. Things are looking really good for crappie at Kentucky Lake. Not seeing the same results at Lake Barkley. They're catching a lot of short crappie right now, but not seeing that 11-inch fish like we are at Kentucky Lake. How they're catching the crappie at Kentucky Lake is with jigs. A lot of anglers are tipping those jigs with a crappie niblet. It's green and chartreuse, red and chartreuse, solid green. Some fishermen say it doesn't matter what you drop down, they're just biting. And catfish, they're catching a few catfish with night crawlers out towards the main river channel. In the tailwaters is not too good right now. Kentucky does have gates open, and so they're in spill mode because of the rain that we had. So the tailwaters is probably shut down for some time. Well, this is Paul Reister. I hope you find a good, safe day to go fishing.
This is Rob Rold in the Northwestern Fishery District. Our two reservoirs, Nolin River Lake and Rough River Lake. Rough River Lake is actually 12 feet above winter pool due to all the rains, and it's falling. Nolin River Lake is a couple of feet above winter pool, and it's actually supposed to come up a little bit and then drop again. Trout have been stocked in all of our Finns lakes, and those are Panther Creek Park, Yellow Creek Park in Davis County, Wayman Morris Park in Owensboro, Madisonville City Park in Madisonville, and Bevel Park in Litchfield. Trout lakes on Peabody WMA, Flycatcher, Access, and Robb's lakes have also all been stocked with trout, and all the Finns lakes as well as Peabody should be stocked again about mid-January or so. Remember, hypothermia sets in quickly. Please, it's extra important to wear your life jackets and be safe around the water this time of year.
I failed to enter the elk draw last year, and all I've done is whine.
So, how are those New Year's resolutions? Remember those? Here's one you can finish today. Registering for the Kentucky Elk Hunt. The Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Elk Draw website is the one and only place you can register for once-in-a-lifetime excitement. fw.ky.gov. It's the easy resolution. fw.ky.gov.
We're back in our second half hour with biologist in charge of ducks and geese for the state of Kentucky, Dr. John Brunjes. If you call an animal migratory, as with most birds, hummingbirds, eagles, ducks, warblers, that doesn't mean they call just one place home, but maybe several states or even several countries over the course of the year. So the decisions we make as a state for the welfare of a particular species is done in conjunction with everywhere else the bird will travel, especially with migrating waterfowl along the travel route we call the Mississippi Flyway.
Ultimate authority for managing migratory birds rests with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in this country, in Canada, the Canadian Wildlife Service. So there's a treaty, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which basically is an agreement between the U.S., Canada, Mexico, Japan, and Russia that says we will manage our migratory bird resources this way. We're all bound by that. And so I can't set seasons in Kentucky. I can't do anything in Kentucky without going through this flyway process and without having the other states and the other provinces in this flyway. We're in the Mississippi Flyway here, and agree with what we're doing. And it's an important part of what I do. I spend a lot of time working on these things with other states and other countries and other areas to make sure that we manage this resource, because those snow geese that nest in Canada come all the way from Canada to Louisiana, and so they go through every state and those provinces and states, and so we all have a vested interest in making sure this population is managed correctly.
And I guess it'd be better off to manage it now than have to take the drastic measures down the road.
We're doing everything we can at this point for snow geese to manage them, and again, as we learn more about them, it's a species that we have less and less concern over, because all the worst case scenarios aren't playing out. And so we keep our eyes on them, we keep monitoring, but right now we're nowhere close to having something that we really need to do. There are lots of other species, I think, at this point that are worthy of our concern and money and time more so than snow geese.
If you looked at waterfowl on a pie chart, of 100% of the waterfowl, I guess I'm asking, what percent would be mallards, what percent Canada geese?
I would say 70% are mallards, 10% are Canada geese, and then the other 20% are the other duck species. Probably 5 of that is wood ducks, and then everything else mixed in.
So snow geese really not a problem here at all?
No, they're not. They're a minor. They're less than 1% would be of that overall picture. But again, mallards are our bread and butter. Our hunters shoot, when they're duck hunting, they shoot mallards. But we have a huge group of folks that do hunt Canada geese now. The funny thing is, Kentucky used to be Canada goose, and western Kentucky. Canada geese now, it's about central Kentucky, in the bluegrass region. That's where the goose hunting is today.
So goose hunting opportunities are expanding.
The areas where you can hunt geese have expanded and changed. Again, it used to be about western Kentucky, and now those birds don't come down as often or at all. And so now the birds are really hunted more here in central Kentucky. But if you look at the harvest in January, 15% of the birds we're shooting are still those birds that used to come to western Kentucky, the southern James Bay population, the Mississippi Valley population of interior geese that nested up on the shore of Hudson and James Bay. 15% of our harvest here in central Kentucky are those birds still.
Let me read something I found online. This was out of 2015. Duck numbers continue to increase with excellent reproduction over the last year. The total duck population released by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service showed 49.2 million ducks, which is an 8% increase over the last year and a 43% increase over the long term from 1955 to present day, basically. Mallards, again, are the most numerous duck species. We had right at 11 million birds in the population, which was an increase of 5%. Sounds like these numbers, there's a bunch of them, but the numbers are increasing. Is that safe to say?
The last 2 years, we have had all-time high counts of overall duck numbers and mallards. The good old days of duck hunting are today. Everybody talks about the good old days. There are more mallards and there are more ducks than there have ever been. Since 1950, when we started counting them, there are more ducks now than there have ever been. So it is the good old days. This year marks 20 years in a row of liberal seasons. Right now, in the Mississippi Flyway, the liberal package is a 60-day season with a 6-bird limit. Part of that is only 4, which may be mallards. Prior to that, I think we were in a moderate, or I don't think we ever made it to restricted package, but a moderate package. Basically, we are at a 30-day season and 3-bird bag. So we've been there in the past, but we have been living in really good times for a long period of time. At some point, we'll probably go back to one of those moderate or restricted packages, because no matter what we do, the world is driven by rainfall when you talk about ducks. And I can do everything in my power, and if it doesn't rain in the prairies and there's no ponds, then the duck numbers are going to decline.
And where are the prairies?
The Dakotas, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, things like that.
So it has to rain there.
We have to have rain there. A big part of our models when we predict duck numbers are, as we fly and do our surveys, we count the number of ponds that are on the landscape. No ponds equals no ducks. And we've seen it time and time again. If you look at the amount of rainfall that you have in places like the Dakotas and again up into prairie Canada, if there's no rainfall, you will see duck numbers decline. And then you see rainfall return, pond numbers return, and then you see ducks increase. We like to think as biologists we have this big important role and we make such a big difference, but if it doesn't rain, there's nothing I can do to change that trajectory of where the population is going to decline.
It's Mother Nature out there calling the shots, isn't it?
I'd love to say 20 years in a row of liberal seasons has something to do with what we did, and it really has more to do with the fact that it's rain. Now, it's important that we don't overharvest and that we don't do things that stop that, but for the most part, the number of ducks out there really are driven by how much rainfall there is. Biologists like to be conservative. We tend to be conservative, and sometimes our conservatism gets us in trouble because we don't ever push it to the point where we see that change and where we see the population decline. Sometimes you have to make a mistake and overharvest.
Know what you did wrong.
Where too far is.
Yeah.
And so if we never get to too far, we never know what too far is. And so, but the same token, you could say, well, we've got 20 years in a row where we've had some really good hunting seasons and good. So that, again, tends to be our stance in most cases, that we tend to be conservative.
I know you have to play well with everybody in the Flyway and federal governments in the U.S. and Canada and Mexico and Japan and everywhere else. But if you were in charge of it all, would you do anything differently than what is being done?
Oh, that's a huge question.
That is a big question,
it is a question.
John.
I'm sure there's some cases of things that I might do a little bit different, but we all have some pet thing that we would do a little bit different. And in the end, I think really the ultimate question is whether it's going to rain or not. That is what drives things. I might focus some of our money that we spend on things in a different place. But ultimately, I think this process is pretty darn good. I mean, it is built over decades and decades and decades of this cooperative agreement between states and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. One of the greatest joys of my life is attending these Flyway meetings where you have all the technical experts from every state in the Flyway and from universities and from Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl, and they all sit around in the room and we look at the data and we decide what the best course of action is. I think it's an amazing process, and I think for the most part it really works.
And people are generally on the same page?
It's generally on the same page. You know, you always have somebody that has there are people with differing opinions, and sometimes, again, the Fish and Wildlife Service has the ultimate authority. And so the Flyway can come together. Like an example was the Flyway recently decided that we thought the appropriate closing date for ducks would be January 31st. Rather than right now, one of the big questions I get, what's the last day of duck season? Well, it's always the last Sunday in January. By federal rule, it's the last Sunday in January. So we ask, as a Flyway, ask the Fish and Wildlife Service to consider, rather than have this changing every year date, just make it January 31st so that people understood it. And some years it is the 31st, some years this year it's the 27th or 8th. And the service said, nope, not interested. We're not doing that. A little bit in their defense, they said, we're going through a process now. We're looking at things that impact hunter satisfaction and harvest. And so let's let that process go to its completion before we make this change.
Where does the February 15th date come into play then?
That's Canada Geese. Geese are separate from ducks.
Okay.
Fish and Wildlife Service has allowed states freedom, and the Flyway's much more freedom in setting goose stuff because, again, goose populations in general are doing well enough that we're not as concerned about them. Ducks, they still keep a very tight control on, and that January 31st date just was not acceptable to them at this point. Our hunters love, every hunter I talk to, can we hunt in February? The ultimate answer is no. Because going back to our compensatory mortality, when you hunt in January, almost every bird you kill increases mortality rate. It isn't compensated for. The later the harvest gets, the less compensation the population can have for it, because there's not much year left before breeding starts. And so almost every bird you kill in January, or if you killed birds in February, would be birds that were going to breed, versus the ducks you shoot in October or November have a very low chance of breeding.
There's a real science behind when you should have the harvest season in place.
Absolutely. And so, again, we like to be conservative. We know from tons of evidence harvest in January has a bigger impact on the population. So, and thus, you assume it carries forth and it becomes even bigger impact in February. So the Fish and Wildlife Service is just not interested in hunting ducks in February.
Back with our final few minutes on migratory game birds and how you factor into the way they are managed. Stay with us. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We are back with the goose guide, John Brunjes, from the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. So what's going on in Kentucky specific to ducks and geese?
We have a big change in this year's hunting season. We have a new management plan for Canada Geese, and that management plan allowed, in the past, the January 31st was the latest that you could hunt geese. The new management plan allows for February 15th closure. We can still have the same number of days, but we're allowed to hunt a little bit later. And so I consistently hear from my hunters, we want to hunt later, and so we believe we can add a little bit of opportunity into the season. And so this year the season will go to February 15th. For
opening 15 days later?
No, actually we were underutilizing our number of days. We can have 107 days of Canada goose hunting, and we were underutilizing our days because there just isn't a whole lot of desire among hunters to hunt before Thanksgiving. So now we're utilizing all those days, and we go to February 15th. Right now we have a split duck season. We have 4 days at Thanksgiving, and then we use our other 60 days by going to the last day of the season and counting back the other 56 days. So if we had an October season, we would have a second split in the season. If you have more than one split, you're only allowed to have one zone. We have 2 zones in the state, in east and the west, because we use those zones to have youth waterfowl seasons.
You have something that's working to your benefit here in Kentucky. It's called the Harvest Information Program. There's a new way it's been implemented, although it's been out for, I remember your predecessor, Rocky Pritchard, talking about this. I want to go back to the 90s.
It was in, yep.
When did HIP actually get its start?
It was somewhere around the early 90s. We had pretty good information on duck harvest, but we had no information whatsoever on how many doves were being shot and how many woodcock were being shot and how many rails and snipe and things like that. And so they developed this system where people, when you buy your license, you answer a series of questions. Do you plan to hunt migratory birds this year? Did you hunt them last year? If you did hunt them last year, how many ducks did you shoot? How many geese did you shoot? And so that system was implemented across the country to give us a way to kind of survey migratory bird hunters and figure out how many ducks and geese are getting killed. In Kentucky, the problem with that is we ran into a couple issues. Number one was vendors, when people were selling the license, it's a lot of extra work to ask those questions. They were skipping those questions or giving them no, or something like that.
And they may not be well versed in that anyway.
They didn't know how important it was. You ran into that problem. There were a couple of problems that were occurring, so that we consistently had some pretty awful data here in Kentucky.
Unreliable data.
Unreliable. Put it this way. In 2014, our estimate of duck harvest was 110,000 ducks in Kentucky, plus or minus 70%.
Really? That's your margin of error, 70%.
So 2 years ago, I went to the commission and asked for a new system. And basically a system that took it away from the vendors, so the vendors didn't have to mess with it. And so anybody hunting migratory birds now is obligated to go online and answer these series of questions. And it takes less than 5 minutes. Our computer system really is our My Profile system is an amazing thing. The longest part of the process for me, unfortunately, was scrolling way back to my birth date year. It's really a fast process, and our hunters did it. And talking to officers in the field, we had better than 90% compliance. In 2015, our harvest estimate of ducks was 120,000, plus or minus, I want to say 17%.
So you went from 70 down to 17.
Absolutely. And in 2014, we harvested somewhere between 30 and 200,000 ducks. 30,000 and 200,000 ducks.
So it could be off by that much.
That much.
But before the change.
Before the change. Now our harvest is, we said it was 120-something thousand, 129, I think, plus or minus that 17%. So it's somewhere between 105 and 145,000 ducks.
So that's much better. But going back to the day before the change, and let's say that this was a problem all up and down the Flyway, from Louisiana up into Canada, and you were off by 70%. Those aren't reliable data.
They were not. But Kentucky, we were the worst. We were consistently one of the worst. We went from the worst data in the nation to one of the best. You're always going to have some variability. I mean, the 17, it might not be as high as 17%, but whatever it is, we're one of the best variabilities out there now. There's going to always be a little bit of noise in there, but we have a much, much better idea of what's happening in Kentucky.
So let's say you're in the field, you're in your duck blind, conservation officer strolls up. What kind of verification is he already going to have, or that you need to provide as a hunter?
You need to provide, when you complete the survey, you can reprint your license, and it will have the number printed on your license. If you don't want to reprint your license, then at the completion of the survey, it gives you a verification number. So you would write that verification number down. Now, the beautiful thing is, if you've seen our new licenses in the new system, your license actually has a little QR code on it. The officer can walk up, scan your license with his phone, and see every detail of what you have there.
And you're obligated to do this prior to the beginning.
Before going hunting.
I can see where if Kentucky or the entire Flyway has a successful waterfowl program, this harvest information program enters into that. So anybody participating can say, hey, I've taken stock in this. Yeah. And one of the reasons it is successful is because of what I'm telling them.
Absolutely. And we use the information from these surveys for managing doves. And managing species like canvasback ducks. As part of our models that we use for these species include harvest data. And so having good harvest data is important. And so one of the things that we're working on now is trying to see the across the board, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is looking at a way to improve HIP across the board, because right now we have 49 different systems. Every state is doing it its own way. Hawaii doesn't have HIP, but every other state is doing its own way. We're trying to see, is there a way we could create a system sort of like Kentucky has, where everybody does it the same way, and that way we would improve the quality of this data across the board.
Certainly. Make it universal.
Absolutely.
So for me to be valid, for anyone to be valid, let's go over some, before we close the show, what we need to have in our pocket, license-wise, duck stamp-wise, and some of these season dates.
Okay. To hunt migratory birds, we're going to leave any migratory bird, doves, woodcock, rail, ducks, geese. You must have your hunting license. You must have a migratory bird permit from the state. Used to be called the state duck stamp. We've combined them into migratory bird and waterfowl permit. So if you hunt doves, you hunt ducks, whatever, you have to have that permit. So you have to have your hunting license. You have to have that permit.
That permit. And that is state and federal?
No.
It's a state?
It's a state permit.
It's a state, and you need a federal stamp.
Or waterfowl.
Waterfowl.
Waterfowl being ducks, geese, and swans. Well, don't shoot swans in Kentucky. There's no season for swans. But in some states, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, there are swan seasons. But for Kentucky, ducks and geese, you must have a federal waterfowl stamp. To hunt doves, to hunt sandhill cranes, to hunt woodcock, you do not need a federal migratory bird stamp.
Where do you get the federal stamp?
The post office is the easiest place to go. It's still sold at the post office, but now a number of states will actually sell them online. So if it's the night before you hunt, you hadn't been to the post office, go on Google, search for the duck stamp somewhere selling it. I think there's 10 or 12 states that sell it online. And so you get it, they'll send you a number and mail you the stamp. And so eventually you'll get the stamp within a few days.
And you'll need to have taken the Harvest Information Survey.
Yes. Every state, if you hunted in North Dakota this year and you took that survey when you bought your license in North Dakota and you're now in Kentucky, you still have to do it for Kentucky. That HIP is state specific. The answer, if it asks you, did you hunt ducks last year? It doesn't care about how many you shot in North Dakota or how many you shot in Texas.
Okay.
It's just about questions about what you did in Kentucky.
And the place to do that is on the Fish and Wildlife website.
Absolutely.
fw.ky.gov.
Yep.
And you're talking about the My Profile section. Where do we find that on that website?
Right there on that front page. When you get to our front page, there's a tab there on the front page that says My Profile. And if you click on it, it'll take you to the page where you log in.
People might think, I don't want to do that. I got another password to remember. It's another username. It's not that at all. That is the easiest thing I've ever seen. And when you do it, even if you're not going to hunt waterfowl, if you just fish, if you just buy a fishing license, go on there. It's amazing. Your history is right there.
Yep.
Every deer you've shot, logged in.
Turkey shot, whatever. Yeah. Again, your history of putting in for quota hunts, all that is right there. Everything you need to know, like when was the last time I shot a deer? Well, you can log on and see right there. 2007 was the last deer you shot. It was a doe in, Breathitt County.
And that gives the validity to all this telecheck and the data that you give throughout the seasons.
Yeah. And it's a great, as we were setting this HIP stuff up, it was in its infancy, and My Profile has become one of the best things I think we've done. Our IT guys here are amazing. As for a handful of people doing a whole lot of work, they've created a really amazing system there.
Seasons as we look into seasons as we look across the winter. Duck season, December 5th. goes through when?
The last Sunday in January.
Which is 29th this year. Okay. Canada Goose season?
It goes from Thanksgiving Day through February 15th.
All right. We have other seasons here. Goose Conservation Order. What does that mean?
That is the snow geese. We were talking earlier about snow geese. That is a special season that we created after all the other seasons close to allow us to hunt snow geese. And the reason that it happens after all other seasons close is that we allow some things that are not legal under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. We allow electronic calls. We allow unplugged shotguns. Not in Kentucky. Actually, we have a statute that does not allow for more than 3 shells in the gun. So it would require a major change of rules for us to do that. But in other states, they do that. So there's some rules that basically are not legal under migratory bird hunting that we relax during this special conservation order season.
So where can you find more information about this?
On our website. Go to our website.
And so that is going to be held, that conservation order there, February 16th through the end of March.
Right. And most part, the birds are out of here by the 1st of March. But one other thing I left out, there's no bag limit. If you can shoot 500 in a day, you can shoot 500. So there's no limit on snow geese during that conservation order season.
Nice. Goose Snow Ross. Explain that to me. I'm not familiar with that term, John.
Okay, that's what collectively I was calling snow geese.
Okay.
So they say it's a species of geese, but there are 2 species there. Blue and snows are the same thing. They're different color phases. If you have a Labrador Retriever, you have a yellow or black. Yeah. There's the same kind of thing. Ross's geese are a separate species that are almost impossible to tell apart in hunting situations, so we lump them in with snow geese.
How about the white-fronted and brant geese?
White-fronted geese are a growing population of geese in western Kentucky, increasing opportunity. If you're going to shoot geese in western Kentucky now, you're likely shooting white-fronted geese. Brant is a coastal sea goose that we have in regulations just so that if one accidentally appears here and somebody accidentally shoots one, they're not going to get a ticket. One was killed in Ohio a couple of weeks ago, but there's less than 5 that appear in the Flyway, and probably less than 1 or 2 that get killed in a year.
They have gotten blown off course.
Yeah, they are way off course.
So that season is as we speak through the February 15th?
Absolutely.
Merganser.
Same as duck seasons.
All right, through as we speak through January 29th.
Yep.
And then lastly, Sandhill Crane.
That will begin a week, Saturday, the 17th of December through the 15th of January.
That wrap it up?
That's most of it. We still have other things like dove. We'll have dove seasons. We have a couple splits of dove season for those folks who like to hunt doves late. There will be a season in late December and into January. There's maybe some other things like sniping that will also be in season. But for the most part, what people are concerned about is you've covered.
Well, you've covered everything that's on your list, the 6 things you said.
Maybe crow season in there. I know that you're a big crow hunter. So.
Of course, I love crow hunting more than anything. If you were a duck, you were a goose, is there something out there that you think hunters or just population of people in general ought to know or realize?
The biggest thing probably the biggest misconception is that ducks' favorite thing in the world is corn. That they have to have corn. You got to plant corn. You got to flood corn. Ducks like lots of different stuff. They like those native vegetations, those native moist soil plants. Those plants hold up to long-term being flooded. They'll be there. Corn is gone in a couple weeks. Those moist soil plants like smartweed and things like that persist in the environment a long time, and they're actually preferred if ducks can get them in a lot of cases. So ducks, if I was a duck, I'd say, plant more native vegetation for me. Flood more timber where I can eat acorns. They love to get in places, green tree reservoirs and things like that, where you can get at acorns and things like that. So they're a lot of times we think we've got to do this corn, but there are a lot of other things that ducks like to eat.
John, I've learned a lot. I'm glad you came out. It's been quite interesting.
It's always fun, man. Anytime.
I hope you have a fantastic 2017.
I'm looking forward to it. You too.
Dr. John Brunjes, Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. Canada Goose season is open as we speak. Closes the 15th of February. Duck season closes January 29th. All these details can be found at the Kentucky Hunting Guide for Waterfowl. It is online at fw.ky.gov and then click the Hunting tab. We are out of time. This is Charlie Baglin inviting you to join us in a week, and we'll go inside outdoors again, right here on Kentucky Afield Radio.